In today's episode, we're going to look at the most terrifying bear attacks ever recorded. From campers deep in the wilderness to hikers who never saw it coming, and even attacks in suburban backyards, these are the most brutal and shocking bear encounters ever documented. Let's dive right into the first story. On the evening of June 28, 2011, Lana Hollingsworth set out for her usual walk around the Pinetop Country Club, a secluded retreat in northeastern Arizona. The night was warm, the air still, except for a faint breeze rustling the trees. Apart from the distant hum of traffic, the neighborhood was silent. Lana had walked these paths countless times, her dog trotting beside her, a loyal companion on these peaceful evening strolls. The country club, nestled 200 miles northeast of Phoenix near the New Mexico border, was a haven for her and her husband Marv, a place where they could escape the demands of daily life. But that night, something else was moving in the shadows, something watching, something waiting. For those who knew her, Lana was a woman of warmth and generosity. She had spent her life helping others, dedicating her time to community service long after retiring from her career as a loan officer in Gilbert, Arizona. She volunteered with the Gilbert Fire Department, served as a community emergency response team member, taught CPR classes, and even dressed as a hospital clown to bring joy to patients in need. Family and friends described her as someone who could lift the spirits of anyone she met, always ready to offer kindness, encouragement, or a smile. Outside of her volunteer work, she found comfort in simple routines. She and Marv spent much of their time at their vacation home in Pinetop, surrounded by towering pines and crisp mountain air. Evening walks with her dog had become a cherished ritual, a moment of solitude and reflection. The neighborhood had always felt safe, and though black bears occasionally wandered near the country club, they had never been a threat. Typically shy and reclusive, these animals avoided humans, scavenging for food rather than seeking confrontation. Lana had always been aware of their presence but had no reason to fear them. For years, her walks had been peaceful, but on this night, that peace was about to be shattered. As Lana walked along the path near the Sports Village area, she suddenly heard a noise. Her dog, ever alert, began pulling at the leash, barking loudly. Lana paused, scanning the area, trying to identify the source of the disturbance. In the fading light, about 60 yards away, she noticed a shadow move near a dumpster. The sounds of glass bottles clinking and rustling trash became audible. Then, a large figure emerged from the darkness, a 250-pound male black bear scavenging through the trash. The bear, alerted to Lana and her dog's presence, froze for a moment, lifting its broad head as it sniffed the air. Its ears flicked forward, its nostrils flaring as it caught their scent, its dark eyes locking onto them through the dim evening light. Unlike most bears that would have retreated at the sight of a human, this one did not back away. It remained still, its massive body tense, shoulders rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. The dog barked, straining at its leash, but the bear was unbothered, unfazed by the noise. It lowered its head slightly, muscles coiling beneath its thick fur, assessing the distance between them. Then, without warning, it moved. A single step forward, then another. The heavy sound of its paws hitting the ground broke the stillness. It was closing the distance, not cautiously, but with purpose. A scavenger bear might hesitate, but this one showed no uncertainty, no fear, only hunger. The bear's slow, deliberate approach turned into a charge. Its powerful limbs drove it forward, its movements faster than should have been possible for such a large creature. Lana barely had time to process what was happening before the animal was nearly upon her. She screamed and tried to run, but the bear covered the final yards in seconds, launching itself onto her back. The force of the impact sent her sprawling forward, her hands instinctively breaking her fall as her head slammed against the hard concrete sidewalk. Stunned and disoriented, she barely had a moment to react before she felt the weight of the bear pressing down on her. Its powerful jaws clamped onto the back of her neck, its razor-sharp teeth sinking deep into her flesh as it pinned her to the ground, its claws scraping against the pavement. Lana tried to fight back, her arms instinctively wrapping around her neck to protect herself, but the bear's force was overwhelming. The animal, relentless and predatory, ignored her struggles as it focused on immobilizing its prey. Lana screamed in agony, her desperate cries echoing through the neighborhood. Neighbors heard the commotion and rushed outside. What they saw was a horrific scene. A massive black bear had pinned Lana to the ground, its thick fur covering her body as its claws swiped at her. Several neighbors tried to intervene, rushing to their cars and sounding the horns, hoping the noise would scare the bear away. They shouted and waved their arms, creating enough of a disturbance to force the bear to retreat momentarily. The bear ran up a nearby tree, leaving Lana lying dazed on the ground, covered in blood. Her dog had run away during the chaos, and she could feel the searing pain from the deep rips and tears in her body. As she lay there, barely conscious, she cried out for help. But just as the neighbors thought the danger had passed, the bear scrambled down the tree and charged at Lana again. The bear, still hungry, was focused on its prey. This was no longer a defensive act, it was a predatory attack, and Lana was now fighting for her life. Despite her injuries, she struggled to push the bear away, her arms and hands covered in slashes. Neighbors continued to try to scare the bear away, but it was relentless, returning to Lana 3 times. On the third attempt, one of the neighbors ran directly at the bear, trying to force it off her. The bear, finally spooked by the sudden threat, fled into the darkness, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Lana was airlifted to Scottsdale Healthcare Osborne Medical Center in critical condition. Her husband Marv arrived at the hospital, horrified to find his wife covered in blood, barely clinging to life. He knelt by her side, holding her hands and desperately trying to comfort her. Lana, still conscious but fading, looked into Marv's eyes. Her voice was weak, but the words carried a devastating finality. She told him she loved him, that she wasn't going to make it, and pleaded with him to take care of the dog. Doctors worked tirelessly to save her, performing 7 surgeries over the next 7 days. Family and friends gathered, and a fundraiser was set up to help with medical bills, as her insurance would not cover the extensive costs. Though Lana showed signs of improvement in the following weeks, her health took a sudden turn for the worse. A bacterial infection, likely from the bear's claws, spread through her body, causing her vital signs to decline. Despite further surgeries and attempts to combat the infection, Lana succumbed to a brain hemorrhage on July 25, 2011. The bear responsible for the attack was tracked down by rangers with the help of dogs. It was found about a mile away from the country club and was euthanized to ensure public safety. Forensic tests confirmed that it was the bear that had attacked Lana. The animal had been starving due to drought and wildfires, which had forced it to venture farther than usual in search of food. Lana Hollingsworth became the first fatality from a bear attack in Arizona since records began in 1990. The biggest question is, of course, could this have been prevented? How could someone know that a bear was waiting in the bushes? On October 3, 1992, Glacier National Park was draped in a cool autumn morning, the first rays of sunlight casting long shadows over its jagged peaks. Located in the northern Rockies of Montana, the park is a sprawling wilderness of over 1 million acres, known for its dramatic landscapes of glacial valleys, dense pine forests, and roaring rivers. The Loop Trail, a popular route for hikers, winds through this rugged terrain, offering breathtaking vistas but also venturing into remote, isolated areas where each step leads deeper into the domain of creatures far more powerful than any human. A domain where a single misstep can have fatal consequences. That morning, the park was nearly deserted. The crisp air carried the earthy scent of fallen leaves, and the occasional rustling in the underbrush hinted at unseen wildlife going about their morning routines. This time of year, Glacier's ecosystem hummed with quiet intensity, animals preparing for the coming winter, some stockpiling food, others navigating the migratory paths that they had followed for generations. For an experienced hiker, the scene was idyllic. But for those attuned to the subtleties of the wild, there was a quiet tension, a sense that this was a land where beauty and danger walked hand in hand. John Petragni, a 40-year-old accountant from Madison, Wisconsin, had always found peace in nature. A devoted outdoorsman, he planned his hikes meticulously, studying maps, weather reports, and wildlife activity before every trip. Friends described him as thoughtful and deliberate, a man who carried a deep respect for the wild places he loved to explore. On this trip, he was alone, something he often preferred. He carried a lightweight day pack filled with essentials, water, trail snacks, a first aid kit, and bear spray. His camera, always at the ready, hung from his neck, poised to capture Glacier's awe-inspiring landscapes. John had started his hike early, hoping to avoid crowds and take advantage of the soft morning light for his photography. The loop trail was quiet. The only sounds were the crunch of his boots on the dirt path and the occasional bird call overhead. He moved with the steady rhythm of someone who felt at home in the wilderness, completely unaware that he was not alone. Unseen by John, a grizzly bear and her 2 cubs were foraging nearby. Grizzly bears are an integral part of Glacier National Park's ecosystem, a symbol of the rugged, untamed beauty of the region. Adult females like the one John unknowingly approached can weigh between 250 and 300 pounds. Their strength is unparalleled, capable of lifting and crushing with ease. During autumn, grizzlies enter a phase known as hyperphagia, consuming up to 20,000 calories a day to prepare for their long winter hibernation. It's a period when their focus sharpens, their behavior becomes more aggressive, and encounters with humans can turn deadly. The mother bear, fiercely protective of her young, had likely been spooked by John's sudden presence. Grizzlies have an acute sense of smell, but with the wind still that morning, it's possible she didn't detect him until he was dangerously close. She saw a threat, not a man, and instinct took over. As John rounded a blind corner on the trail, the grizzly appeared before him, a massive silhouette framed by the forest. The mother bear stood on her hind legs, her posture a mix of curiosity and warning. Behind her, the 2 cubs clung close, watching intently. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. John stopped abruptly, his body motionless upon seeing the bear. He didn't run, which may have been his only chance to de-escalate the situation. But grizzlies are unpredictable, and the closeness of her cubs meant this encounter was likely doomed from the start. Without warning, the mother bear dropped to all fours and charged. Grizzlies can reach speeds of up to 35 miles per hour, and the distance between them vanished in seconds. John fumbled for his bear spray, but there was no time. The bear collided with him, her massive paws knocking him to the ground. The attack was quick and brutal, the bear's claws tearing through clothing and flesh with devastating force. She bit at his arms and shoulders, using her immense strength to subdue what she perceived as a threat to her cubs. Despite the frenzy, this was not a predatory attack. The mother bear's intention was not to kill, but to neutralize the danger and protect her young. John's screams echoed through the forest, momentarily breaking the silence. But in the wilderness, such sounds are swallowed quickly by the vastness of the land. The bear eventually retreated, her cubs trailing behind. The forest fell silent once more, leaving only the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Later that afternoon, wildlife photographer Buck Wild, a frequent visitor to Glacier, was hiking the same trail. Wild was intimately familiar with grizzly behavior, having spent years documenting these powerful creatures. When he stumbled upon John's abandoned daypack, he immediately sensed something was wrong. Nearby, a camera lay on the ground, its lens shattered. Following a faint trail of broken branches and disturbed earth, Wild made a grim discovery. John's lifeless body lay in the underbrush, bearing the unmistakable marks of a grizzly attack. The surrounding area, marked by the disturbed earth and broken branches, revealed the intensity of the encounter. Wild notified park rangers who arrived hours later to assess the situation. The tracks confirmed the presence of the mother bear and her cubs, and rangers concluded the attack had been defensive, a protective response to a perceived threat rather than outright aggression. However, as the rangers and Wild assessed the scene, the mother bear charged them, halting just 50 feet away before retreating. Her lingering presence, along with her increasingly aggressive behavior, raised serious safety concerns. Ultimately, park officials made the difficult decision to euthanize the mother bear and her cubs to prevent further incidents. For those who knew John, the news was devastating. He had been careful, experienced, and well prepared. Yet, even those measures were not enough to protect him in the unpredictable wilderness of Glacier National Park. The incident showed the sheer unpredictability of the wild, where even a moment's encounter can turn fatal despite the best precautions. Though Glacier Park was estimated at the time to have between 500 and 600 bears, the trail grew quiet once more. The only evidence of the tragedy, a faint disturbance in the underbrush, soon reclaimed by the forest. The loop trail remained, waiting for the next traveler to pass through its shadowed corridors, unaware of the story left behind. It was late September 2023, and for Doug Inglis and Jenny Gus, this was supposed to be yet another thrilling yet peaceful trip to the remote wilderness of Banff National Park in Alberta, Canada. This wasn't just any hiking adventure, it was a cherished tradition they had upheld for decades. Twice a year, the couple ventured into the backcountry, once in the spring and again in the fall, embracing the solitude and serenity that nature provided. At 62 years old, both Doug and Jenny were seasoned outdoor enthusiasts, with extensive experience in hiking, canoeing, whitewater rafting, and camping. They weren't reckless thrill seekers, but cautious, methodical nature lovers. Each time they traveled into the backcountry, they took every safety precaution possible. They carried survival kits, emergency equipment, and bear spray, adhering strictly to bear safety protocols. Doug and Jenny had been inseparable since university, sharing both their personal lives and professional careers. They worked as technicians in the same scientific lab, a testament to their deep partnership both at work and in life. But even with their wealth of experience in the outdoors, nothing could have prepared them for what would happen next. Banff National Park is Canada's oldest national park, known for its rugged mountain peaks, thick forests, and pristine glacial rivers. It's home to some of North America's most magnificent and dangerous predators, including wolves, cougars, and black bears. But the most formidable predator of all is the grizzly bear. Approximately 65 grizzlies are known to inhabit Banff, alongside an additional 20 to 40 black bears. While attacks on humans are rare, grizzlies are unpredictable, immensely powerful, and in certain conditions, deadly. During hyperphagia season, when bears enter a stage of extreme hunger before hibernation, their behavior becomes even more erratic and aggressive. Still, Doug and Jenny were prepared. They followed every safety rule, always stayed on signposted routes, and checked for park warnings before setting up camp. On that fateful trip in September, no recent bear sightings had been reported in the area. There were no official warnings. Everything suggested that this would be just another routine backcountry adventure. By day 5 of their week-long hike, Doug and Jenny had covered miles of rough terrain. With their faithful dog by their side, they trekked through the Red Deer River Valley, a remote, roadless stretch of untouched wilderness. They hadn't quite reached their planned campsite, but decided to set up camp early to avoid trekking in the dark, a wise decision considering the potential risks. At 5 p.m., Doug sent a check-in message via Garmin InReach, a satellite emergency device, to his uncle Colin Inglis. The message was routine, a simple assurance. "We didn't make the planned campsite, but setting up camp now. Everything's okay." Little did they know this would be their last message. As the sun set, Doug and Jenny followed strict food storage procedures. Their food was carefully hung in a tree far from their tent. They cleaned up their camp, ensuring no food odors lingered. With their bear spray close by, they crawled into their tent for the night, reading on their e-readers, a nightly tradition before sleeping under the stars. But something was lurking in the darkness. Unbeknownst to Doug and Jenny, a grizzly bear was already closing in on their campsite. In the thick darkness of the backcountry, its keen nose worked overtime, detecting scents imperceptible to humans. It could have been the faint remnants of their dinner, the subtle human scent lingering in the cold air, or perhaps simply the sound of movement within the tent. Whatever the reason, the bear had locked onto them, and it was coming closer. A shadow in the night, moving silently, circling. The couple, deeply engrossed in their e-readers, felt it before they heard it. A shift in the atmosphere. A heavy presence just beyond the thin walls of nylon. Their dog, always alert, suddenly stiffened. Its ears perked up, its body tense. Then, a soft sniffing, a shuffling noise, a low, guttural sound vibrating in the night air. Doug and Jenny froze, their pulses quickened. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end. Neither of them dared to breathe. The dog let out a single low growl, barely audible but full of warning. Then the tent ripped open. Like a knife through paper, the grizzly's claws tore through the fabric with a sound like a gunshot in the silence. A second later, a massive, fur-covered head shoved through the opening, its dark eyes gleaming in the dim glow of their reading lights. The bear didn't hesitate. With a powerful swipe, it collapsed the tent, forcing Doug and Jenny onto their backs as they scrambled to escape. The dog lunged, barking furiously, snapping at the beast, trying desperately to protect its owners. But the bear was unstoppable. With a single swipe of its paw, it sent the dog sprawling, its yelp piercing the night. Doug grabbed his bear spray. His hand shook, but he managed to aim it directly at the bear's face and unleash a full, blinding blast. Nothing. The grizzly didn't even flinch. If anything, the powerful irritant infuriated it even more. It let out a deafening roar, shaking its head violently, then charged straight into the remains of the tent, snapping its massive jaws. Jenny scrambled backward, fumbling for her own canister. She managed to fire a second spray, the chemicals misting into the air. The bear recoiled slightly, shaking its head, but it didn't run. It wasn't acting defensively anymore. This was a startled bear reacting out of fear. This was a hunt. Doug and Jenny had nowhere to run. The tent was half collapsed, the exits blocked, and their only defense, the bear spray, had failed. They tried everything they could, screaming, kicking, throwing anything they could reach. But the bear relentlessly pursued them, tearing through sleeping bags, equipment, anything in its path. Somehow, amidst the chaos and blood, one of them, no one will ever know who, managed to grab the Garmin device and press the SOS button. It was their final plea for help. At 8:15 p.m., the message reached Colin Inglis. The words were staggeringly simple yet chillingly final. Bear attack bad. That was all. No explanation, no time for more, just 3 words. Then silence. The emergency alert immediately mobilized the Wildlife Human Attack Response Team, a highly trained unit specializing in animal-related emergencies. But fate was against them. A thick fog rolled into the valley. Visibility plummeted. A helicopter rescue was out of the question, meaning the team had to trek on foot. The terrain was brutal. Steep rocky slopes, dense underbrush, and treacherous river crossings slowed them down. Armed with rifles, medical gear, and flashlights, the responders pushed forward, knowing that every second mattered. When they finally reached the site at 1 a.m., what they found was horrific. Silence. Then the sight of 3 lifeless bodies. Doug, Jenny, and their dog all lying outside the tent. The tent was flattened, ripped apart like shredded paper. Scattered on the ground were 2 empty cans of bear spray, evidence of their last stand against the predator. Inside the remains of the tent, their e-readers lay broken, their final pages unread. The campsite showed signs of a brutal struggle, but even more disturbingly, the bear had not left. From within the tree line, a dark figure shifted. A low growl rumbled through the clearing, and then it charged. The same bear was coming for them. One of the rescue officers raised his rifle and fired. The grizzly dropped just feet away, its massive body collapsing into the undergrowth. Later, a necropsy confirmed the grizzly was a 25-year-old female. She was underweight with poor teeth, suggesting she had struggled to find food, perhaps leading her to hunt humans. Unlike most grizzlies, which attack defensively and leave, this bear had stayed near the scene, waiting. It was a predatory attack, something exceedingly rare in Banff's history. The last known fatal grizzly attack in the park had occurred in 1973, when a heavily sedated bear killed a biologist during its release. On the morning of July 22, 2023, the Buttermilk Trail in Montana's Gallatin National Forest stretched out under a pale sky, its 3-mile path weaving through dense pine woodlands. Sunlight filtered through the towering trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine and damp earth. This area, part of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, is a haven for outdoor enthusiasts drawn to its serene beauty. Despite recent warnings of increased grizzly activity in the region, the trail remained a favored spot for hikers and runners seeking solitude in nature. Among those drawn to Buttermilk Trail was 48-year-old Amy Adamson, an experienced ultra-marathon runner and devoted adventurer from Derby, Kansas. Known for her boundless energy and passion for the outdoors, Amy had dedicated much of her life to exploring wild and remote places. Her love for adventure was matched by her determination, exemplified by her incredible feat of hiking 2,000 miles of the American Discovery Trail. In recent years, she had completed several ultramarathons, including the grueling Dead Horse Ultra in Utah. For Amy, the wilderness was more than a place to visit, it was a source of inspiration, freedom, and peace. As she set out on the Buttermilk Trail that morning, Amy walked through an area of towering pine trees, their needles carpeting the forest floor. Birds moved between branches, and the occasional rustle of underbrush indicated the presence of wildlife. The trail, winding and relatively easy, provided a straightforward route through the forest. But nature, as Amy well knew, holds both beauty and unpredictability. As she moved along the Buttermilk Trail that morning, enjoying the quiet serenity of the forest, the peaceful rhythm of her hike was shattered. Turning a bend in the path, she suddenly came face to face with a female grizzly bear and her 2 cubs. The encounter was abrupt and left little room for reaction. Grizzly bears, especially mothers with young, are known for their territorial nature and defensive aggression. Startled by Amy's presence, the bear immediately perceived her as a threat. Amy froze in place. Her years of experience outdoors had taught her how dangerous such situations could be. Standing just yards from a mother bear with cubs, she was in one of the most precarious positions an outdoor enthusiast could face. The cubs were nearby exploring the undergrowth, but the mother's posture shifted instantly. Her head rose, ears forward, her dark eyes locking onto Amy. The stillness was absolute. A moment stretched taut with tension. Without warning, the bear charged, closing the distance in an instant, its massive form crashing through the dense underbrush. The suddenness of the attack left no opportunity for Amy to react, her steps frozen in place. The bear struck with overwhelming force, its claws slicing through layers of clothing and flesh with ease. The grizzly's weight pressed her to the ground, its snarls resonating through the forest, a chilling sound that broke the stillness. The attack was instinctual and relentless. With a bite force between 975 and 1,160 pounds per square inch, the bear's jaws were capable of crushing bone with ease. Its razor-sharp claws, delivering swipes with over 600 pounds of force, inflicted deep, gaping wounds. The earthy, musky scent of the animal enveloped her, and the sound of snapping branches mixed with the bear's snarls in a chaotic symphony of the wild. Amy's struggles likely ended quickly as the bear's instinctive actions inflicted fatal injuries. When the mother bear was satisfied that the perceived threat to her cubs had been neutralized, she retreated into the forest, her cubs trailing behind. The trail grew quiet once more, the sounds of the attack fading into the stillness of the wilderness. Amy's lifeless body lay on the ground, surrounded by the beauty she had sought and cherished. The morning sun continued its ascent, its light cutting through the trees, indifferent to the tragedy that had just unfolded. Later that morning, another hiker made their way along the buttermilk trail. They stopped abruptly, the peaceful rhythm of their hike shattered by the sight before them. Amy's body, bearing the unmistakable marks of a bear attack, lay in the underbrush. The hiker quickly notified authorities, and wildlife officials arrived on the scene hours later. Their investigation confirmed what the tracks and injuries suggested: a defensive attack by a female grizzly with cubs. The trail and nearby areas were promptly closed as wildlife officials launched efforts to locate the bear responsible. Tracks and other evidence suggested the attack was a defensive reaction rather than predatory behavior. A tragic incident triggered when Amy inadvertently surprised a mother bear with her cubs. Officials determined that the bear's actions were consistent with natural protective instincts, and no measures were taken to relocate or remove the animals. It was June 19, 2017, when Aaron Johnson, 27, was assigned to work at Pogo Mine, located 90 miles east of Fairbanks in the rugged Alaskan wilderness. An experienced field technician with Alaska Biological Research, Aaron had spent years immersed in the outdoors, applying her studies in geology and botany to the wild landscape around her. It was the kind of work she had always dreamed of, a blend of adventure and science. The day had started like any other, with Aaron and her colleague, 38-year-old Ellen Trainer, being dropped off by helicopter to begin their field work. The Pogo Mine, a gold mine with ties to both Japanese and Australian companies, was situated in bear country, an environment where safety precautions were paramount. All employees, including Aaron and Ellen, had undergone bear safety training, learning how to use bear spray effectively and the option to carry rifles into the field. On this day, 6 employees were assigned to various sites, paired for safety, with Aaron and Ellen working together. The duo had been briefed and equipped, aware of the potential dangers but determined to complete their tasks. They were collecting geological samples along a transect, detailed work that required precision. The women crouched low to the ground, documenting the soil's structure, vegetation, and pH, absorbed in their task. The forest around them was thick, the sounds of the wilderness humming softly as they worked, unaware of the danger closing in on them. A male black bear, hungry and on the prowl, had been tracking them from a distance. The bear, using the wind to its advantage, had crept closer and closer, its eyes locked on the 2 women. It was only when Aaron and Ellen looked up, their eyes meeting the bear's, that they realized the danger they were in. The predator was no longer hiding. Its immense presence was impossible to ignore. In that moment of realization, the 2 women instinctively reached for their bear spray. But before they could even use it, the bear surged forward with terrifying speed. It covered the distance between them in an instant, its claws raking Aaron's body as it knocked her to the ground. Ellen, desperate to protect her colleague, sprayed the bear in the face. But the bear was undeterred, its aggression only intensifying. Aaron was pinned beneath the bear, helpless as the animal bit and clawed at her, its immense strength rendering her powerless. Ellen continued to spray, shouting, attempting to distract the bear long enough for Aaron to escape. But the bear turned on Ellen, attacking her just as ferociously as it had attacked Aaron. The struggle was brutal, a blur of claws, teeth, and desperate cries for help. Despite their best efforts, the bear seemed impervious to their resistance. It wasn't retreating as most bears would do when confronted with a threat. Instead, it was intent on its attack, its eyes locked on its prey. The two women fought back, but the bear's strength and determination were overwhelming. It seemed there was no escape. The bear finally retreated, its hunger momentarily sated. Ellen, dazed and disoriented, managed to call for help over the radio, transmitting a mayday alert. The male pilot of a nearby helicopter, having heard the distress call, quickly altered course. The helicopter, just 5 miles away from the mine, rapidly closed the distance. Ellen lay motionless, barely aware of the whirling blades above as the helicopter descended. The winch was lowered and Ellen was lifted into the air, her body limp and unresponsive. As she was hauled up to safety, the pilot turned the helicopter back toward the mine. Ellen was soon transported by ambulance to the hospital in Fairbanks, but Aaron was nowhere to be seen. The helicopter returned to the site and a Pogo mine employee was lowered to search for Aaron. He found clear signs of the struggle: blood, scattered equipment, and flattened vegetation, but no trace of Aaron. Determined, he followed a blood trail through the dense forest. After a short distance, he spotted the bear standing over Aaron's body just 30 feet from the last sign of struggle. Without hesitation, the employee raised his rifle and fired, killing the bear. But it was too late. Aaron had succumbed to her injuries. The vibrant young woman who had dedicated her life to the outdoors, who had married her best friend just weeks earlier, was gone. Her death was a devastating loss, not only for her family and friends, but for the entire community. Ellen, severely injured, was transported to the hospital in Fairbanks where she would recover from her injuries, though she would never forget the brutality of the attack. The Department of Fish and Game launched an investigation confirming that this was a predatory bear attack, an extremely rare and deadly occurrence. It was determined that the bear had stalked them for nearly 15 minutes before the attack, slowly closing the gap behind them and using the forest to stay hidden. News of the attack spread quickly and fear began to sweep through the Alaskan communities. The incident was the second fatal bear mauling in the state within the same week. Concerns mounted. Were bears now seeing humans as prey? Were these rare attacks becoming more common? The Alaska Department of Fish and Game issued warnings urging people to carry bear spray and stay vigilant in the wilderness. But the tragic reality was clear. No amount of preparation or safety equipment could guarantee survival in the face of such a determined predator. Aaron's death, though part of a rare and deadly pattern, would forever be remembered as a haunting reminder of the dangers lurking in the wild. Aaron Johnson's life had been one of passion, adventure, and dedication to the natural world. Her untimely death in the Alaskan wilderness was a sobering reminder of nature's indifference and the unpredictable dangers it holds. July 6, 2021 was supposed to be another night of adventure under the stars for Leia, but by dawn she would be gone. The 65-year-old was no stranger to the wild, having spent her life pushing limits and embracing nature's challenges. A registered surgical recovery nurse, a competitive cyclist, and a fierce adventurer, Leah thrived in the outdoors. She had spent the day cycling through Montana's grizzly country, part of an ultra-endurance event stretching nearly 4,000 kilometers from Banff, Canada to New Mexico. The vast wilderness of Ovando, Montana was exactly the kind of place she loved. Rugged, remote, and breathtakingly beautiful. But what Leah failed to consider was that she wasn't alone. Earlier that day, residents and officials had reported sightings of a lone grizzly bear, a food-conditioned predator that had lost its natural fear of humans. Leah's sister and fellow riders pleaded with her to stay in a hotel for the night. They knew how dangerous the bear could be, but Leia, stubborn and fearless, refused. She set up her solitary tent next to the Blackfoot River, unknowingly placing herself in a predator's hunting ground. At 3 a.m., Leia was jarred awake by the sound of snuffing and heavy breathing just outside her tent. She held her breath, trying to process what was happening. A massive shadow loomed over the fabric, the silhouette of something far too big to be anything but a grizzly bear. Then, sniffing right above her head. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized the bear was actively investigating her. Leia screamed. The sudden outburst startled Kim and Joe Cole, a couple camping nearby. They jolted awake, their senses immediately on high alert as Leia's terrified screams echoed through the night. Without hesitation, they joined in, shouting as loud as they could, their voices piercing the darkness. The bear, seemingly unsettled by the sudden human commotion, let out a sharp huff before retreating into the shadows, vanishing into the thick Montana wilderness. The air remained heavy with tension, the silence after the chaos almost deafening. Every second felt stretched as they strained to hear any sign of the grizzly still lingering nearby. But the danger, for now, seemed to have passed. Leia trembled as Kim and Joe rushed to her side, their hands gripping her shoulders as they tried to steady her. She was visibly shaken, her breathing ragged, but physically unharmed. Her pulse raced as she struggled to comprehend just how close she had come to death. Kim urged her to get out of there as fast as she could because she knew that wasn't a friendly bear. There was an urgency in her tone, a plea for Leia to see reason. But Leia, ever the experienced adventurer, remained defiant. She had encountered wildlife before and had always managed to handle it. In her mind, this was no different. She assured them she would take extra precautions, certain that the bear had only been passing through, lured by a faint scent of food. Determined to prevent another encounter, Leia carefully removed every food item from her tent, placing it nearly 30 feet away. She double-checked for anything that might emit an odor, diligently scouring her belongings for even the smallest crumbs. The couple stood by watching her work, unconvinced but unwilling to argue further. Leia was methodical, confident in her preparation. She had followed every safety protocol she had ever learned, ensuring that nothing remained inside her tent that could attract the predator again. She believed she had done enough. She believed the danger had passed. But it hadn't. Just an hour later at exactly 4 a.m., Kim and Joe were wrenched awake once more. This time it wasn't a scream that cut through the silence, but a series of horrific, gut-wrenching noises. Thrashing, heavy panting, the distinct sound of a struggle. It was happening. Joe's blood ran cold as he scrambled for his flashlight, fumbling with the zipper of his tent. As soon as he stepped outside, his stomach lurched at the sight before him. Leia's tent was collapsing, flattened under the sheer weight of the massive grizzly bear. The canvas sagged violently, shifting and twitching under the beast's brutal assault. Joe's heart pounded as he grabbed his bear spray and sprinted toward Leia's tent, Kim right behind him. Without hesitation, he aimed and unleashed a full blast of bear spray directly at the animal's face. The burning chemical should have sent it fleeing, but the bear didn't retreat. Instead, it let out a deep, guttural roar, momentarily recoiling but not abandoning its grip on Leia. Kim, shaking, fired her own canister, the air filling with the acrid scent of the repellent. Finally, the grizzly released its hold, staggering backward and disappearing into the woods as suddenly as it had arrived. Panting, Joe and Kim rushed forward, adrenaline fueling their every movement. They ripped open the tent, desperate to reach Leia. But the moment their eyes fell upon her, they froze. A suffocating wave of dread settled over them as they stared in horror. Leia wasn't moving. Her body lay unnaturally twisted, contorted in a way that sent a chill down their spines. The weight of the 500-pound grizzly had crushed her, snapping her spine in the process. Blood pooled around her, soaking into the shredded fabric of the tent. The attack had been instantaneous and brutal. There had been no time to fight, no time to escape. She was gone before she ever had a chance to scream. She had been gone before she even had a chance to fight back. Investigators arrived at the scene hours later. What they found confirmed their worst fears. Leia had been well prepared, but she had made one fatal mistake. Inside the tent, authorities discovered a small bag of dried blueberries, one Leia had overlooked. Just outside, a sandal bag full of food sat within reach of her tent's entrance. It was all the confirmation they needed. The grizzly had returned, not just out of curiosity, but with intent. It had learned that humans meant food. 3 days later, on July 9th, wildlife officers spotted a grizzly bear breaking into a chicken coop. They shot and killed it on the spot. DNA analysis confirmed the truth. This was the bear that killed Leia Loken. Leia Loken was fearless, but even the most experienced adventurers can miscalculate the dangers of the wild. She thought she was prepared, but one small oversight cost her life. Her tragic death serves as a grim reminder. When venturing into grizzly country, you can never be too careful. It was a crisp, quiet evening along the Mackenzie River in Canada, where Julien Gauthier and his friend Camille Toscani set up camp after another day of paddling. The sound of the river rushing past filled the air, a constant, soothing backdrop to their otherwise still environment. Julien, a musical composer, had come to the wilderness to record the natural sounds that would become the backbone of his next symphony, a piece he had been dreaming about for years, one that would immerse listeners in the sounds of the wild, grizzly bears, seals, and the harsh winds of the Arctic. It was a journey that had taken years of planning. Julien, a composer in residence with the Brittany Symphony Orchestra, had already earned recognition for his previous works, particularly Symphonie Australe, a composition inspired by the icy winds and the calls of penguins and seals. On that fateful day, he and Camille, a biologist and photographer, had set out to record sounds from Julien's homeland, Canada, where the vast wilderness had shaped his early years. The goal was clear: to document the raw, untouched sounds of nature and weave them into his symphony. Their trip along the Mackenzie River was ambitious, nearly 1,000 miles of rugged terrain, wild waters, and isolation. But it was the perfect place for Julien's next masterpiece. Each day was spent recording, Camille snapping photos of Julien as he worked. By the end of the month-long journey, Julien planned to return to France and create a mini-concert, where Camille's photographs would accompany the music. But what they didn't expect was that the very wilderness that inspired their work would soon become a source of danger. On August 6th, after 5 days of paddling, Julien had posted an update on his social media. The trip, he wrote, had been exhausting but deeply inspiring. He also mentioned the presence of bear activity, an ominous sign that something was stirring in the forest around them. Despite the distant presence of wildlife, they had seen little of human life for days, save for the occasional bear. The mention of these animals seemed like a passing note at the time, a small detail in the grand scheme of their journey, but it would turn out to be a haunting foreshadowing. The night of August 14th was like any other. After a long day on the river, they set up their tents and prepared dinner. They spoke of their plans for the next leg of the trip, laughing and reminiscing about their past adventures. Soon after, the two settled into their separate tents for the night, unaware that they were not alone in the wilderness. As darkness enveloped the campsite, something stirred in the underbrush. The wind had died down and the stillness was broken only by the rushing water of the river and the occasional snap of a twig. A large grizzly bear, its keen sense of smell drawn to the campsite, began to prowl, its massive form moving silently through the trees. With a nose that could pick up a scent from over 60 feet away, the bear honed in on the faint smell of humans. It was drawn to the campsite, where it found nothing but the remnants of food and the presence of two sleeping figures. The bear's instincts were sharp, its curiosity intense. It padded around Julien's tent, sniffing at the canvas, and then, without warning, it tore through the fabric, its claws easily slicing through the thin material. Inside, Julien stirred, but before he could fully comprehend the threat, the bear lunged. The weight of the animal slammed onto Julien, pushing him down into the dirt. He fought, struggling against the overwhelming force, but the bear's jaws found their mark, clamping around his neck with terrifying force. The attack was swift and unrelenting. The grizzly dragged Julien from the tent into the trees, its grip unyielding despite his desperate kicks and punches. Blood blurred his vision as his strength faded, his cries drowned by the roar of the river and the crushing power of the bear's jaws. Julien's body was dragged through the underbrush, leaving a trail of blood behind him as the bear pulled him deeper into the woods. His breath came in ragged gasps, his life slipping away as the weight of the bear pressed him into the earth. In the darkness, Camille slept, unaware that her friend, her traveling companion, was fighting for his life just a few feet away. When the first light of dawn crept into the sky on August 15th, Camille awoke. The sounds of the river and the cold morning air filled her senses, but something felt off. She unzipped her tent and stepped outside, immediately noticing the destruction. Julien's tent had been shredded, its fabric torn apart as if by some monstrous force. Heart-pounding, she called out for him, but there was no answer. Panic set in as she searched frantically, her eyes scanning the campsite for any sign of her friend. Following the trail of blood, Camille soon realized the terrifying truth: Julien was gone. In a daze, Camille ran to a group of nearby travelers who had set up camp for the night. Desperate, she explained the situation, and they quickly activated their emergency beacon. The signal was received by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police at 7:45 a.m., and a search was launched. The isolated location, only accessible by air and water, presented immediate challenges for rescuers. But the search was hindered further by poor weather conditions, delaying the recovery efforts. By the following day, Julien's body was found, his injuries consistent with a grizzly bear attack. The Department of Environment and Natural Resources confirmed that it was likely a grizzly that had taken Julien's life, although no conclusive evidence was released about the specific bear responsible. Despite the rarity of such fatal attacks, 3 had been recorded in the area since 2001. The tragedy was undeniable. July 28, 1984 was a warm summer day in Yellowstone National Park. The Pelican Valley, with its vast stretches of wilderness and abundant wildlife, offered an irresistible allure to 25-year-old Brigitte Fredenhagen, a Swiss tourist fulfilling her dream of adventure. Captivated by Yellowstone's beauty, Brigitte had planned every detail of her solo journey into the backcountry, prepared for the challenges the wild might bring. But even with precautions, the unpredictable nature of the wilderness would soon test her in ways no one could have imagined. Brigitte had arrived in Yellowstone just days earlier with her brother and sister-in-law. Together, they marveled at the park's famous geysers, hiked its well-trodden trails, and shared stories around the campfire. But Brigitte craved more. She longed for solitude, for the thrill of venturing alone into the wild. Her journal, tucked safely into her backpack, was already filled with sketches and reflections, each entry capturing her deep love of nature. The Pelican Valley, remote and teeming with wildlife, was the final leg of her adventure, a place of unparalleled beauty but also high bear activity. Before setting out, park officials strongly advised Brigitte against hiking alone in such a rugged and unpredictable area. They reminded her of the risks posed by the grizzlies that roamed the valley and emphasized the importance of proper precautions. Ranger James Youngblood issued Brigitte her camping permit for Site 5B1, also cautioning her against hiking alone and emphasizing the dangers of keeping food in her tent. Undeterred, she assured them she understood the dangers and was prepared. Brigitte planned to camp overnight and meet her family the following day at the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone, determined to experience the wilderness on her own terms. The morning began with hugs and goodbyes at the junction of Astringent Creek and Broad Creek. At the junction, a large placard stood warning hikers of Yellowstone's untamed wilderness and the inherent dangers of venturing alone. As her family watched her disappear into the winding trail, the jingle of bear bells tied to her pack faded into the distance. Brigitte felt exhilarated. The trail stretched out before her, and the only sounds were the crunch of her boots on the dirt path and the soft rustle of the breeze. For hours, she walked, pausing occasionally to take in the breathtaking scenery. The Pelican Valley was alive with the sights and sounds of summer. Birds singing, grasses swaying, and the distant babble of streams weaving through the landscape. By late afternoon, fatigue began to set in. When Brigitte reached White Lake, she spotted an unoccupied campsite nestled near the water. Her assigned campsite at Broad Creek was still several miles away, but the thought of continuing in her tired state felt daunting. Deciding to stop for the night, she set up camp following all the safety precautions she'd learned. She prepared her dinner away from the tent and hung her food 85 feet up between two pine trees, far from the reach of any curious animals. In her journal, she wrote that she had taken all the precautions, a quiet reassurance that she was prepared for anything. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Brigitte settled into her dome tent. The rhythmic patter of rain on the canvas and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind lulled her to sleep. The valley grew dark and quiet, the wilderness embracing its nightly calm. But outside, hidden among the trees, a shadow moved. A grizzly bear had caught the scent of Brigitte's food. Drawn by the aroma, it lumbered into the campsite. The bear found the bag of food suspended between the trees and tore it down with ease, devouring the contents. Still unsatisfied, it turned its attention to the tent. Its keen nose detected Brigitte's scent inside, and curiosity drove it closer. The bear circled the tent, sniffing and pawing at the fabric. With a powerful swipe of its claws, it tore through the side of the tent, jolting Brigitte awake. She barely had time to react before the bear lunged, its massive jaws clamping around her head. Its teeth pierced her skull and jawbone, dragging her from the tent as she screamed in terror. The sound of her cries resounded briefly before being swallowed by the vast wilderness. The grizzly hauled her into the woods, its immense strength rendering her struggles futile. Blood streaked the forest floor as it dragged her deeper into the darkness, its claws tearing through her clothing and flesh. Within minutes, her cries ceased. The bear began to feed, tearing into her lifeless body with a ferocity driven by instinct. The next day, Brigitte's brother and sister-in-law waited anxiously at their meeting point. When she failed to arrive after some time, their concern turned to fear. They reported her missing to the park rangers, who immediately launched a search effort. Ranger Marshall, dispatched on horseback around 7 a.m., followed the route Brigitte had planned to take. When he reached White Lake, he found her tent torn open and abandoned. Her belongings were scattered, and her food bag lay shredded nearby. A gruesome trail of blood and human tissue led away from the campsite. Marshall called for backup, and 2 additional rangers arrived by helicopter, armed and prepared for a dangerous search. The trail eventually led them to a patch of flattened grass where they found evidence of a struggle, shreds of clothing, and signs that a bear had fed there. Hours later, they discovered Brigitte's body approximately 250 feet from her campsite. Her remains were unrecognizable. Her arms had been skinned, and large portions of her torso and legs were missing. The grizzly had dragged her to this spot to feed, leaving behind a scene of brutal predation. The rangers carefully removed Brigitte's remains and transported them back to park officials for further examination. The area around White Lake was temporarily closed to visitors as an investigation was conducted, and efforts were made to locate the bear responsible for the attack. Despite their search, the grizzly was never found. Her family returned to Switzerland shortly thereafter, bringing with them the tragic end to a journey that had begun with so much hope and excitement. The Pelican Valley, now quiet and undisturbed, remained a dark witness to the events that had unfolded. It was a perfect August morning in Montana's Glacier National Park, the kind that made the wilderness seem almost inviting. The towering peaks, the crisp mountain air, and the endless stretches of untouched land gave visitors the illusion of peace. But nature has no mercy, and for Johan and Jenna Otter, their dream hike would become an unimaginable nightmare. Montana is one of the most breathtaking yet dangerous landscapes in the United States. Spanning over 147,000 square miles, it's home to a vast array of wildlife: white-tailed deer, wolverines, elk, coyotes, and wolves. But none are as feared as the grizzly bear. For centuries, this apex predator has ruled these lands, its immense power making it one of North America's deadliest animals. For father and daughter Johan and Jenna Otter, this was supposed to be a special bonding trip. Jenna, a young and athletic dancer, was about to begin her freshman year at the University of California, Irvine, and this was one last adventure before she left home. Johan, a seasoned marathon runner, saw the trip as a perfect way to celebrate a new chapter in their lives, unaware that this journey would be etched into history for an entirely different reason. The morning of August 25th started with the golden glow of sunlight filtering through the Montana wilderness. The previous day had been rainy, but today was different. The mist had cleared and the trails sparkled under the morning sun. At 7:30 a.m., Johan and Jenna set out for a hike, eager to make the most of the beautiful weather. As they climbed, a thick carpet of thimbleberry bushes lined the trail, their red fruit glistening like tiny jewels. Bear grass and wild lilies swayed gently beneath the towering spruce and pine trees, and beyond the dense foliage, Lake Josephine shimmered in the distance. The two hikers, already above the tree line within 40 minutes, paused to take in the snow-dusted peaks that surrounded them. It felt like they had stepped into a postcard. Both were aware of the dangers that lurked in Montana's backcountry. They had studied the precautionary measures, knew the rules of hiking in bear country, and made sure to talk loudly to avoid surprising any animals along the way. They had bear spray with them, but it was buried inside Johan's backpack, a mistake that would soon prove catastrophic. Jenna had an uneasy feeling, the kind that gnawed at the back of her mind. The early morning hours were when wildlife was most active, and though she trusted her father, a deep instinct told her something wasn't quite right. They continued their climb in companionable silence, marveling at the breathtaking views of Glacier National Park. When Johan stopped to film the landscape with his camera, Jenna told her father to just head back home. Johan chuckled, snapping out of his trance, and quickly caught up to his daughter. Then it happened. Jenna had taken just a few steps ahead when she rounded a bend in the trail and froze. A massive brown silhouette moved in front of her. Jenna's heart slammed into her chest. A grizzly bear, a fully grown mother, stood just feet away, two yearling cubs trailing behind her. The bear hadn't seen them yet. Grizzlies rely on their extraordinary sense of smell to detect threats, but the wind was blowing down the mountain, preventing the animal from catching their scent. Then Jenna moved. The sudden motion caught the mother bear's attention. The grizzly snapped her head toward the hikers. A mother bear with cubs is the most dangerous kind of grizzly. Their protective instincts override everything, and this mother saw Jenna and Johan as a threat. Jenna panicked. She screamed, turned, and ran, a fatal mistake when dealing with grizzlies. Johan looked up and saw the charging beast. He didn't hesitate. Johan dropped his backpack and threw himself in front of his daughter. The grizzly slammed into him like a freight train, clamping her 3-inch canines into his thigh. Johan screamed in agony. The bear's bite force is approximately 1160 psi, strong enough to crush bone. Jenna stood frozen in horror as she watched her father being ripped apart before her very eyes. The grizzly shook him violently, her powerful jaws digging deeper into his flesh. Johan kicked and thrashed, but it was useless. The beast was too strong. The attack was swift, brutal, and merciless. The grizzly's grip on Johan was relentless, its massive jaws clamped onto his leg, the teeth grinding against muscle and bone. The pain was unimaginable, but amid the chaos, Johan's survival instincts kicked in. He knew he had to get free to put distance between himself and the bear. Scanning his surroundings, he saw 3 options: the steep mountain face to his right, a sharp drop to his left, and an alder patch just 20 feet behind him. The choice was clear. With every ounce of strength he had left, Johann launched himself into the alder patch, crashing onto his side. The impact was jarring. His head smacked against a rock, his right eye split open, and his body trembled with shock. But he was alive. Johann barely had time to register his injuries before the realization hit him. Jenna was still on the trail, alone with the bear. He screamed at her, his voice hoarse with desperation, ordering her to jump toward him. But Jenna, frozen in fear, had spotted the bear spray, their only defense. She scrambled toward Johann's backpack, fumbling to retrieve the canister. Her hand shook as she tried to figure out how to use it, but the seconds ticked by too quickly. There was no time. She had to run. Heart pounding, she leapt from the trail without knowing what lay beneath her, choosing the unknown over the certainty of the bear's wrath. Johann, still reeling from his escape, didn't realize Jenna had jumped. He continued to yell, his voice echoing through the wilderness. But the bear had already turned its attention to him. It poked its head over the ledge, sniffing the air, its eyes locking onto Johann's battered form. The illusion of safety in the alder patch was shattered. In an instant, the bear launched itself from the slope, closing the 20-foot gap effortlessly. Johann had never seen something so massive move so fast. The impact was devastating. The bear's claws tore into his back, shredding his clothes and carving deep gouges into his flesh. Johann curled into a fetal position, trying to shield himself from the worst of the attack. But the grizzly was determined. It clamped its powerful jaws onto him, lifting him from the ground like a rag doll, shaking him violently. Johann thrashed, kicking and twisting, desperate to break free. His mind raced. He had to keep the bear away from Jenna at all costs. Then, the ground beneath him disappeared. In the struggle, Johann was hurled off the ledge, plummeting 30 feet down. His body slammed against the rocks below, his face taking the brunt of the impact. Everything went black. For a moment, he thought he was dead, but then the pain flooded back in waves. His skull throbbed, his ribs ached, and blood poured from open wounds. Yet, somehow, miraculously, he was alive. As he forced himself upright, a horrifying realization struck him. He had fallen onto the same ledge where Jenna had landed, and worse, the bear was still coming. Johann barely had time to react before the grizzly reared up, towering over them. A 10-foot behemoth, its blood-matted fur bristling, eyes locked on its next kill. Jenna crouched behind a bush, frozen. There was nowhere left to run. The bear dropped onto all fours and charged. Johann stood his ground, terror and resolve battling inside him. He had to buy Jenna time. Desperately, he grabbed for a rock, his only weapon, but it crumbled in his grasp. The bear was already there. The attack was worse than before. Its jaws clamped onto Johann's arm, tearing muscle from bone. Pain exploded through him, but he fought back, kicking, punching, anything to slow it down. The grizzly was relentless. It lunged again, locking its jaws around his head. Johann felt his scalp rip, his skull crack. His screams vanished into the wilderness. Watching from just feet away, Jenna was frozen in horror. She wanted to help, to do anything, but she knew that if she moved, the bear would turn on her next. She had to think fast, but Johann had already made his decision. With his last ounce of strength, Johann wrenched free from the bear's grip and leapt off the cliff. He tumbled through the air, expecting death, but miraculously landed on a small rocky ledge below. Pain erupted through his body, but when he looked up, he saw it. A sheer drop, just steep enough to keep the bear from following. He was safe. But Jenna was still in danger. The bear sniffed the air, catching the scent of her blood. Slowly, it turned toward the bushes where she was hiding. Jenna clenched her teeth, her entire body trembling. The bear stepped closer, its massive paws crushing the underbrush. Then, suddenly, it lunged. The jaws clamped onto Jenna's head, tearing through flesh and bone, ripping her lower jaw open. White-hot pain shot through her body, but somehow, in that moment of sheer agony, Jenna found clarity. She went limp. She played dead. The bear paused, its breath hot against her face. It sniffed, licked the blood, then, just like that, it backed away. Jenna remained motionless, not daring to breathe. Her head spun, her vision blurred, but she stayed completely still. The grizzly lingered for a moment longer, then, satisfied that the threat was neutralized, it turned and disappeared into the trees. For 2 agonizing minutes, Johann lay below, holding his breath, waiting for the nightmare to end. Then, Jenna's faint voice cut through the silence, calling out for her dad. Johann's entire body sagged with relief. She was alive. Shaking, he reached up and touched his head. His fingers met exposed bone. He could feel the jagged edge of where his scalp had been torn away. The shock was wearing off and the pain was setting in. If he didn't get help soon, he wouldn't last much longer. Then, Jenna began to scream for help. Her shouts echoed through the valley, bouncing off the mountains. Johann joined in, their combined cries carrying across the wilderness. For what felt like an eternity, they screamed. Then, a response. Hikers. Rescuers arrived 2 hours later, their faces pale as they took in the carnage. Johann and Jenna were barely clinging to life, their bodies mangled, their blood staining the rocks. Johann suffered a severed spine and neck, a torn scalp, a punctured eye, broken ribs, and deep lacerations across his body. Jenna's face had been partially torn apart, but they had survived. After 9 surgeries and months in the hospital, Johann fully recovered. Jenna started university, her body wrapped in bandages, her scars a permanent reminder of the day they nearly died. Reflecting on the attack, Johann knew one thing. They had made one critical mistake. Their bear spray should have been accessible. Jenna should have known how to use it. A simple moment of preparation could have saved them from the worst pain of their lives. But despite it all, they were alive. On July 7, 1948, the forest of Michigan's Upper Peninsula stretched for miles, thick with towering pines and tangled underbrush, a wilderness largely untouched by time. It was a place where black bears roamed freely, moving like shadows between the trees, always present but rarely a threat. For those who lived on the outskirts of the wild, encounters with these animals were not uncommon, but attacks were almost unheard of. That changed when a starving black bear emerged from the forest and set its sights on a 3-year-old girl. Carol Ann Pomeranke lived with her family in a remote cabin deep in the Marquette National Forest, a place where civilization felt like a distant memory. The Pomerankes had built their lives around the land, adapting to its rhythms and unpredictability. Her father, Howard Pomeranke, worked as a fire observer, spending long hours in a watchtower perched high above the treetops, scanning the horizon for any sign of smoke. His role was vital in a time when wildfires could spread unchecked, threatening the vast wilderness of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Howard's job kept him away from home most of the day, leaving his wife Vivian to care for the family and manage the daily demands of life in isolation. She balanced household chores with tending a small garden, preparing food, and ensuring that her 2 children, Carol Ann and her older brother Alan, learned the values of hard work, caution, and respect for the world around them. Their life was simple but demanding, shaped by the rhythm of the wilderness. Mornings began with the warmth of the kitchen stove, evenings ended with the distant calls of owls, and in between, the forest was a constant presence. The children had the freedom to explore but were always reminded to stay within sight of the cabin. Carol Ann knew the land by sound, the whisper of wind through the pines, the chatter of birds, the rustling of unseen creatures in the underbrush. She had learned to recognize the animals that shared their world. Deer slipping through the trees, raccoons scurrying across the porch at night, and the occasional black bear lingering at the edges of the clearing. Black bears were common in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, with a population of around 12,000, but sightings near homes were rare. Typically weighing between 100 and 300 pounds, they were far smaller than their grizzly cousins and far less aggressive, preferring to avoid human contact. The bears had never been a threat to the Pomerankes. They kept their distance, watchful but uninterested in the family. For as long as they had lived there, that unspoken understanding had never been broken. But this year, the forest felt different. Food was scarce, the rivers had run low, berry patches had thinned, and prey had grown harder to find. Black bears, usually timid and predictable, had begun appearing where they hadn't before, near homes, farms, and roads, desperate for anything to eat. Though black bear attacks are rare, they do happen, and when they do, they're often driven by extreme hunger or the bear feeling cornered. Michigan had never recorded a fatal black bear attack, and the animals were known to avoid humans whenever possible. But as the summer wore on, rangers warned that some bears were growing bolder, crossing into new territory, their hunger overriding their fear. A starving bear, its body weakened and its instincts sharpened by desperation, was an unpredictable force. The Pomerankes, like many families, listened to the warnings but never imagined the danger would reach them, until the day it did. The afternoon of July 7th, Vivian sat in the kitchen with a visiting friend, Mrs. Summers, the open door letting in the warm summer air as they talked. Carol Ann played on the wooden porch just a few feet away, her small hands tracing patterns in the dust. The day was peaceful, ordinary, until a single scream shattered the stillness. Vivian shot up from her chair, her heart pounding. It was a short, sharp cry, not the playful sound of a child at play, but one of pure terror. She rushed to the door, her eyes immediately locking on to the scene outside. Carol Ann was on her hands and knees reaching toward the doorway, her face twisted in fear. Behind her, stepping onto the porch, was a black bear. It was thin, its ribs pressing against its dark fur. Its eyes, locked onto the child, were not the cautious eyes of a bear merely passing through. They were the eyes of a predator. It exhaled a deep, guttural growl, muscles tensing beneath its thick coat. Then it attacked. The bear's jaws clamped onto Carol Ann's legs, dragging her from the porch in a single brutal motion. She screamed, clawing at the wooden boards, her tiny hands slipping against the grain. Vivian lunged forward, but Mrs. Summers yanked her back, slamming the door shut in an act of blind survival. The last thing Vivian saw before the door closed was her daughter's outstretched arms, her terrified face disappearing into the tall grass. Outside, the struggle was short. Carol Ann kicked, screamed, fought, but the bear was stronger. It clamped its jaws around her skull, the pressure crushing bone instantly. Her small body went limp as the bear, driven by starvation, dragged her toward the trees. Vivian fought against Mrs. Summers' grip, sobbing as she broke free. She ran for her husband's gun cabinet, her hands shaking as she tore through the drawers, searching for the pistol. But it wasn't there. Howard had taken it with him to the fire tower. She ran back to the door, throwing it open, but the yard was empty. The only sign of what had happened was a trail of blood, smeared across the dirt leading into the woods. Panicked, Vivian ran to the nearest ranger station, barely able to form words. Within minutes, 7 rangers, led by Bruce Elliott, arrived at the Pomeranke cabin, one of them bringing search dogs to track the bear's scent. If there was any chance Carol Ann was still alive, time was running out. The search party spread out following the trail. One of the Labrador retrievers caught a scent almost immediately, leading the men deeper into the forest. About 160 yards from the cabin, they found the first sign, a child's shoe streaked with blood. The men exchanged uneasy glances, realizing what they were likely about to find. Still, they pressed on, the dogs pulling at their leashes. Just 150 feet further, they found her. Carol Ann's small body was slumped against a tree, her legs eaten to the knee. Her abdomen tore open, her intestines stretched across a nearby bush. Her tiny shirt was still intact, slightly rolled up as if she had simply fallen asleep. But the fatal wound was unmistakable. A deep puncture wound near her left eye, a hole so deep it reached her brain. The men stood in stunned silence, the weight of the discovery sinking in. One of the rangers whispered a curse under his breath. There was nothing to be done. Ranger Wayne Weston stayed behind to guard the body while the others continued forward, hoping to track and kill the bear responsible before it could strike again. He stood alone, gripping his rifle, scanning the tree line. Then movement, a rustling in the bushes. Without warning, the black bear charged from the trees, rushing straight for Weston. The ranger raised his pistol and fired 5 shots in rapid succession, the bullets tearing into the bear's chest. It collapsed just feet from where Carol Ann lay. The other rangers, having heard the shots, rushed back to the scene. A quick examination of the bear's stomach confirmed what they already knew. Inside were human remains. The bear had killed the child, fed on her remains, and was returning to finish what it started. Carol Ann Pomeranke's body was recovered from the forest and returned to her family, presumably by the rangers involved in the search. Her parents were devastated, struggling to comprehend the brutal loss of their young daughter. Vivian, who had witnessed the attack firsthand, was inconsolable, haunted by the final moment she had seen unfold before her eyes. The bear responsible was taken for further examination to confirm its role in the attack. Authorities determined that the bear had been suffering from extreme starvation, its stomach completely empty aside from the remains of the child. It had not been hunting, it had been desperate. Her death remains one of the few recorded fatal black bear attacks in Michigan history, and serves as a horrifying warning to those living on the edge of the wild. On a cold January morning in 2023, the Andijan Zoo in Uzbekistan began its day like any other. Located in the heart of the Fergana Valley, the zoo houses a range of native and exotic species, including the Himalayan brown bear, a powerful animal native to Central Asia. These bears, which can grow up to 7 feet tall and weigh as much as 300 kilograms, are critically endangered due to poaching and habitat loss. Conservation efforts have made zoos a refuge for these creatures, but the ethical conditions of such enclosures often fall short of adequate, leaving both animals and staff in precarious situations. The Himalayan brown bear at the Andijan Zoo had always been a source of fascination and unease for the staff. Kept in a small, sparse enclosure, the animal displayed signs of stress, pacing back and forth along the glass barrier and showing heightened agitation. Despite this, the daily routines of zookeepers continued, often under less than ideal safety protocols. Among the staff was a young man identified only as AG, who had worked at the zoo for several years. Known for his diligence and care, AG was familiar with the routines required to tend to the bear's enclosure, including cleaning and preparing meals. On that day, AG was tasked with cleaning the bear's living quarters and hiding food to provide enrichment for the animal. Before entering the enclosure, he followed standard procedure by locking the bear into a gated holding area. However, the bear's feeding schedule from the previous day was unclear, leaving AG uneasy as he entered the space. The enormous creature, already visibly agitated, stared through the bars as AG avoided making direct eye contact, focusing instead on his tasks. AG swept the floors and discarded waste, maintaining a brisk pace in the cold morning air. Once the cleaning was complete, he began hiding pieces of meat around the enclosure, hoping to encourage the bear to forage and engage with its environment. Immersed in his work, AG didn't notice the error that would seal his fate. He had failed to properly secure the gate separating him from the bear. The mistake went unnoticed until it was too late. As AG turned to leave, he saw that the bear was no longer confined. It had moved through the unlocked gate and was now only feet away, positioned directly between him and the exit. The bear's presence was unmistakable, its powerful form dominating the space. Recognizing the immediate danger, AG attempted to make his way to the door, but the bear reacted immediately, closing the gap with a single forceful lunge. The bear struck AG with a single swipe, knocking him to the ground. The zookeeper's desperate cries for help cut through the stillness of the morning, alerting his colleagues to the unfolding emergency. The bear, spurred by its instincts, climbed on top of AG, pinning him to the floor. Its claws tore through fabric and flesh alike, and its powerful jaws bit down repeatedly on his neck and upper body. Blood spattered across the enclosure, darkening the dirt in vivid streaks as the bear's relentless attack unfolded. Despite the cries for help, the attack was over within moments. The bear, now bloodied and agitated, stood guard over the lifeless body of the zookeeper. Other staff members, drawn by the commotion, rushed to the scene. What they saw froze them in place. The enormous bear pacing around AG's motionless body, its face stained with blood. The staff knew they had to act quickly to recover the body, but the bear showed no signs of retreating. Arming themselves with wooden planks and long poles, the zookeepers cautiously approached the enclosure. They shouted and threw objects at the bear, attempting to distract and move it back toward the gated holding area. The bear, agitated and defensive, resisted at first, dragging AG's body deeper into the enclosure as if guarding it. With persistence, the team managed to guide the bear into the gated section and securely lock it away. Only then did they approach the enclosure's main area, retrieving AG's lifeless form and carrying him to safety. Though it was painfully clear there was nothing more to be done. An investigation was launched immediately to determine the circumstances of the attack. Authorities discovered significant lapses in safety protocols at the zoo, including inadequate training and poorly maintained enclosures. The unlocked gate that allowed the bear to reach AG was a glaring oversight, but the zoo's overall conditions also came under scrutiny. While the blame was shared between human error and systemic failings, the loss of life highlighted the inherent dangers of working in close quarters with such powerful animals. Today, the Andajan Zoo remains open, its operations continuing despite the tragedy. The Himalayan brown bear involved in the attack is still housed there, a silent symbol of the risks that come with attempting to confine and care for such creatures. The death of AG, though quietly acknowledged, highlights the deadly consequences that can arise when safety measures are overlooked, leaving both humans and animals to pay the price. It was July 6, 2011 when husband and wife Brian and Marilyn Matayoshi decided to take a peaceful walk through Yellowstone National Park. They were following the Wapiti Lake Trail on the park's east side in Wyoming. The weather was clear with sunshine spilling through the trees and the air warm enough for a light jacket. The couple had brought their cameras and binoculars, eager to capture the beauty of the park. Marilyn had a small backpack with water and an extra sweater, and they paused frequently to admire the views and the wildlife. They watched birds, ospreys, falcons, and eagles perch in the trees, while the quiet flow of a nearby creek made the air feel even more serene. Around an hour and a half into their walk, they encountered another hiker who warned them of a brown bear with 2 cubs up ahead, about 500 yards along the trail. Grateful for the warning, Brian and Marilyn continued their walk, looking forward to the chance of seeing the bears from a safe distance. A short time later, they spotted the bears, 2 small cubs and their mother, a large grizzly. The cubs were playing in the meadow, their bodies tumbling through the grass, while their mother moved through the scene with a calm, steady gait. Brian and Marilyn stopped to take photos, both excited by the rare opportunity. They snapped several shots, trying to capture the peaceful family before moving on. As the mosquitoes began to swarm, they decided it was time to turn back. Just as they retraced their steps, they encountered the bears once again, but this time, the mother grizzly and her cubs were much closer, less than 100 feet away. The sight of the bear and her cubs so near the trail sent an immediate jolt of unease through the couple. They stopped, unsure of how to proceed. The mother bear, noticing them, began to move toward them. The pair were frozen in place, aware of the danger but unsure of what to do. The park's guidelines were clear: stay still, stay calm, and avoid sudden movements when a bear is near. If attacked, it was advised to lie down and protect the neck and head, but the instinct to flee was overwhelming. Before they could think it through, they turned and started running as fast as they could. The crunch of their feet against the trail was muffled by the frantic thumping of their hearts. Panic surged through them. Marilyn believed for a moment they might outrun the bear, but when she dared glance back behind her, she saw the grizzly gaining on them. The bear's speed was terrifying. They managed to run almost 200 yards, but the bear was relentless. Marilyn veered off the trail, ducking behind a fallen log, praying the bear would pass. But the mother grizzly wasn't satisfied. The bear grabbed Brian, who was still on the path they had just walked, with one powerful paw, knocking him to the ground. The blow stunned him, leaving him motionless for a moment, but it was the deep bite to his leg that caused him to scream. The bear's jaw sunk into his flesh, tearing through muscle and cutting into the femoral artery. The blood flowed quickly and Brian was unable to move. His life slipped away right there on the trail. Marilyn, helplessly watching from her hiding place, was paralyzed by fear. She lay as still as possible, face down in the dirt, her legs trembling with terror and her heart pounding in her chest. The only sounds were the bear's growls and the heavy thud of its paws through the dirt. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying the bear would not notice her. After what felt like an eternity, the bear seemed to lose interest in Brian and move away. Marilyn had held her breath, praying it would leave her alone. For a few minutes she stayed on the ground, unsure whether the danger had passed. Then, cautiously, she crept over to Brian. He lay still, his face pale, his legs soaked in blood. Marilyn's desperate attempts to revive him were futile. She pulled out her phone, but there was no signal. Frantically, she dialed 911 repeatedly, but there was nothing. In a panic, she waved the phone high in the air, hoping to reach someone. Eventually, another hiker appeared and they called for help. But by the time rescuers arrived, it was too late. Brian had died from the attack. The authorities decided not to euthanize the bear right away, but after another fatal encounter in the same area, they confirmed the same bear was responsible for both attacks. With the evidence clear, the decision was made to kill the grizzly. The two cubs were removed from the park and sent to a wildlife center. Marilyn, still grappling with the shock and grief, sifted through Brian's belongings and discovered his camera, filled with countless photos of the park. The last image he had captured was one of a mother grizzly and her cubs strolling peacefully through the meadow, an image that marked the final moments of serenity before everything changed. The brutal attack that followed shattered the calm of the day, leaving Marilyn to mourn the loss of her husband. The life they had built vanished in an instant, and all that remained were the photographs, immortalizing a peaceful moment that would never come again. It was April 15, 2015, when Eleanor Whitgrove, 84 years old, woke up in her cabin on the edge of Pisgah National Forest, unaware that it would be the last time she would watch the morning mist curl over the Blue Ridge Mountains. For nearly 40 years, this small patch of land had been her world, a quiet place where the comforts of home met the unpredictable wild. Eleanor had built a life here after her husband's passing nearly 4 decades earlier, choosing the silence of the forest over the noise and pace of the city. She had once been a schoolteacher, structured, empathetic, and meticulous. After retirement and widowhood converged, the days stretched long. With no children nearby and few close neighbors, the isolation deepened. But the animals gave her a rhythm. It started with birds, placing seed trays on the railing, watching chickadees and mourning doves pick through the mix. Then came the squirrels, which she began tossing nuts to, and the deer, who quickly learned to wander close when the scent of sliced apples drifted across the yard. Eventually, she began preparing dedicated food scraps each morning: oatmeal with honey, vegetable peels, old bread, fruit cores, always arranged in a shallow metal bowl placed on a stone slab near the tree line. It gave her purpose, something to wake up for, something to look after. She told neighbors the animals were her company. She gave names to some of the regulars, 2 raccoons she called the twins, a lame doe she recognized by her halting step. She spoke about them with the same warmth she once reserved for her 3rd grade students. To Eleanor, this wasn't just feeding wildlife, it was caretaking. It was structure, it was routine. It was proof that something still relied on her. Even the bears, which she rarely saw up close, became part of the silent exchange. She believed that if she kept the peace, if she was consistent, gentle, they'd never have a reason to hurt her. Warnings had come: quiet knocks, stern visits from wildlife officers, concerned neighbors. They told her feeding the animals would end badly. She smiled, listened, and carried on. In her eyes, the creatures of the woods weren't wild or dangerous. They were familiar souls, hungry and harmless, who deserved kindness. And perhaps in return, they filled the hollow place her husband once occupied. The morning was cold and clean, the air sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. Eleanor moved through her kitchen with practiced ease, gathering oatmeal, honey, and 3 red apples into a large metal bowl, an offering for the wild visitors who had, over the years, come to trust the scent of kindness drifting from her porch. By 7:30 a.m., the sun had burned away the morning fog. Eleanor stepped onto her porch, the bowl balanced carefully in her hands. The apples gleamed under the sunlight, a small offering she intended to leave at the forest edge. She moved steadily down the steps, her small frame swallowed by the tall grass that surrounded the clearing. As she crossed the yard, she spotted a dark shape near the old cedar bird feeder, a black bear. Seeing a bear, though not daily, was not entirely rare for Eleanor. Over the past few months, she had occasionally glimpsed 1 or 2 wandering at the edge of the woods, sniffing cautiously before retreating. She always treated these sightings with a gentle awe, never fear. But this morning, something felt different. A massive black bear stood just beyond the feeder, its thick coat gleaming in the morning light. Later estimates placed him at around 350 pounds, his powerful shoulders shifting beneath glossy fur. Eleanor's heart lifted, not in fear but with a kind of tender excitement. She recognized him from previous sightings near her property, and in her mind he was simply a hungry visitor deserving of kindness. She moved closer, closing the gap to 15 feet, hoping to gently place the apples on the ground where he could find them easily. The bear's body tensed, his ears flattened, his mouth parted to reveal yellowed teeth. Subtle warning signs. Signs Eleanor either didn't see or refused to acknowledge. Without a sound, the bear charged. He covered the distance between them in seconds. Rising up on his hind legs, he towered over her before lashing out with a massive paw. The swipe knocked the metal bowl from her hands, apples scattering across the dew-wet grass. It also caught Eleanor across the shoulder, slashing through the fabric of her cardigan and tearing into her flesh. She crumpled to the ground, stunned, the air knocked from her lungs. Before she could cry out, the bear's jaws clamped onto her neck and shoulder. Arteries ruptured under the crushing force. In one brutal motion, the bear dragged her a few feet toward the tree line, leaving a dark trail across the trampled grass. Across the road, Tom Harkins, a retired postal worker and longtime neighbor, was checking his mailbox when he heard a broken, desperate scream. Alarmed, he sprinted toward Eleanor's property. waving his arms and shouting to scare off whatever was there. The bear, startled by the sudden noise and movement, released Eleanor and disappeared into the dense woods, vanishing between the trees. But it was already too late. Eleanor lay motionless in the grass, her cardigan torn, the apples she had gathered just hours earlier now scattered around her like fallen offerings. The entire encounter had lasted less than 2 minutes. In the days that followed, wildlife officials set traps and installed trail cameras. The same black bear was captured on footage raiding bird feeders, unsecured trash bins, and even porches across nearby properties. Having lost his fear of humans, he was deemed a threat and euthanized. No charges were filed, no one was blamed, but the tragedy prompted a renewed push for public education around wildlife habituation, particularly among retirees living at the edge of the forest. On the evening of May 4, 2021, the dense forest of Waiparus Creek, northwest of Calgary, Alberta, were alive with the quiet stirrings of dusk. The scent of pine and damp earth lingered in the crisp mountain air, carried by a faint breeze that rustled through the boreal canopy. The last light of the sun cast golden streaks across the rugged terrain, illuminating the Ghost River Valley below. The steady trickle of water against the rocks provided a rhythmic backdrop to the wilderness, a sharp contrast to the deepening silence that settled over the trees. As night crept in, the forest seemed almost unnaturally still, an unsettling quiet broken only by the distant rustling of unseen movement in the underbrush. This was grizzly country. Dr. David Lertzman, a 59-year-old assistant professor at the University of Calgary's Ascanier School of Business, had spent his life studying and respecting the natural world. He was a dedicated environmentalist, known for his deep understanding of wilderness survival, indigenous knowledge, and sustainable development. His passion extended beyond academia. He led week-long retreats in the Kanaskaski's backcountry, guiding students through the rugged terrain to teach them how to navigate, meditate, and find their place within the environment. His work was more than just a profession, it was a calling. David and his wife Sarah Lertzman had built a life surrounded by nature in Waiparus Creek, where the wilderness began just beyond their doorstep. His daily trail runs through the nearby Ghost River Trail system were a sacred routine. Moments of solitude where he could move through the landscape he cherished, soaking in the sights and sounds of Alberta's untamed beauty. But the wilderness, no matter how familiar, is never without risk. And on this night, something was waiting for him in the shadows, watching, listening, moving ever closer. Grizzly bears are the undisputed apex predators of North America's wilderness, their power unmatched in the ecosystems they dominate. Weighing between 400 and 1,000 pounds and standing up to 9 feet tall, these monstrous creatures command their territory with instinct-driven precision. Though primarily omnivorous, feeding on berries, roots, and small mammals, grizzlies are territorial animals, aggressive when defending cubs or food sources. Unlike black bears, grizzlies do not flee or climb trees when threatened. They hold their ground, charge, and if necessary, attack. Their bite force, nearly 1,200 pounds per square inch, can crush bone with ease, and their claws, reaching up to 4 inches long, make them lethal in close combat. Most encounters between humans and grizzlies end without conflict. The bears retreat, the hikers move on. But sometimes a single misstep can turn a peaceful moment into a deadly confrontation. At 6 p.m., David left home for his evening run, choosing the Moss Trail, a rugged mountain path with steep inclines and dense forest, winding through the boreal wilderness of Waiparus. The familiar rhythm of his footsteps echoed along the dirt trail as he ascended toward a high embankment, where the land plunged sharply into a vast, rugged wilderness. The sheer drop stretched hundreds of feet below him, the trees at the base appearing as tiny, swaying specks in the fading light. He slowed as he reached the edge, wiping the sweat from his brow and peering down at the dizzying height that made the world beneath him seem impossibly distant. Far below, the twinkling lights of Calgary flickered like scattered stars, a faint reminder of the world he had momentarily left behind. But something else was there. A female grizzly bear, possibly with a cub nearby, had been feeding just beyond the embankment. She had heard him before he had even reached the clearing. The sound of his footfalls, the scent of sweat in the breeze, it was enough to trigger her instinct to defend. Unlike most bears that retreat at human presence, this one did not run. She remained still, crouched in the brush, muscles tense beneath her thick fur. Then, in a flash of movement, she charged. David never saw her coming. The impact hit him from behind with immense force, sending him plunging forward off the embankment. His feet slipped on the loose dirt, arms flailing as he pitched over the edge, the world spinning violently around him. With the bear remaining on the trail above, David tumbled 900 feet down the rocky slope, his body colliding with jagged rock, fallen trees, and sheer cliffside before landing near the Ghost River below. He had no chance to recover, no chance to fight back. By the time he reached the bottom, he was gone. Back at home, Sarah paced anxiously. David was never late. His runs typically lasted an hour at most, but now 4 had passed. Around 10 p.m., she called his phone, but there was no answer. Something was wrong. Grabbing a flashlight, she left the house alone, retracing the route she knew so well. The forest loomed around her, impossibly dark and silent. She called his name, her voice swallowed by the night. Unbeknownst to her, she was standing on the cliff above him, searching desperately for a man who was already gone. By midnight, she called Cochrane Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Within 2 hours, a full-scale search was launched. A helicopter with a spotlight, search dogs, and rescue teams combed the area, retracing his likely path. Just after 2 a.m., the light from the helicopter illuminated the lifeless body below. David had fallen nearly 900 feet, suffering instantaneous fatal injuries on impact. An autopsy later confirmed what officials already suspected. He had not been mauled or consumed. This was not a predatory attack. The bear had reacted out of defense, a split-second act of territorial aggression that had sent him to his death. Wildlife officers immediately set baited traps along the trail, hoping to locate the bear responsible, but weeks passed with no sign of her. Eventually, to prevent attracting other large predators, the traps were removed, and the trail was reopened to the public. The University of Calgary community was devastated. Dr. Jim DeWall, dean of the Haas-Gagné School of Business, described David as a friend to all, a spiritual leader, and an inspiration to thousands of students. His legacy was one of environmental stewardship, deep respect for Indigenous knowledge, and a lifelong dedication to sustainability. On May 6, 2021, the university lowered its flag in his honor. For Sarah, the grief was impossible to accept. She had been so close, calling his name in the darkness, unaware that he had already taken his last breath. She had searched the trails, not knowing she had stood above the place where he had fallen. The knowledge would stay with her forever. David spent his life teaching others how to connect with nature, how to respect it, understand it, and move within it safely. But in the end, it was nature that took him. It was a calm, warm morning in Mora, New Mexico, where Adelia Trujillo, at 93 years old, went about her day in her small, tin-roofed house. The day was not unlike any other for the elderly woman whose life had been marked by simplicity and a deep connection to the land. She had never been one for modern conveniences, preferring instead the steady rhythm of a quieter life. Raised with strong values, Adelia was a woman who made sure to share the traditions of her heritage with her family, from cooking meals on her wooden stove to telling her grandchildren the stories of their ancestors. She was a woman who knew her mind, guided by her unwavering faith. But on this particular day, Adelia would encounter something she never expected, something that would change the course of her life forever. It had been a normal morning. Adelia completed her prayers, tidied up her home, and began her daily tasks. There was a soft breeze outside, the type that ruffled the dry desert brush but did little else to disturb the stillness. Adelia wasn't in a rush to go anywhere, but that afternoon she had planned to visit the Senior Citizen Center like she did most days to check on her friends. As she moved about, the peaceful quiet was suddenly shattered. The back door, which she often left ajar to let in the fresh air, was forcefully thrown open. Adelia, startled, rushed to the kitchen, her thoughts racing. She wondered if someone had broken in, perhaps a thief looking for something of value. But when she reached the doorframe, her eyes locked with the last thing she could have imagined: a massive black bear standing in the doorway, blocking her path. The animal's dark eyes blinked in the dim light of the room, its fur matted and unkempt. Adelia froze. The bear was huge, easily weighing over 250 pounds, and it looked just as confused to see her as she was to see it. Standing at nearly 6 feet tall, it towered over the frail woman, who was barely 5 feet 3 inches in height. Her heart pounded in her chest as the fear crept in. She knew that if the bear decided to attack, there would be no chance of her surviving. Adelia's instinct, however, wasn't to remain still. In a panicked moment, she screamed, the sound piercing the air. It was a natural reaction, but a dangerous one. Bears, much like many wild animals, can become aggressive when startled, and her cry only served to escalate the situation. The bear shifted, its ears perked, and without hesitation it charged. Adelia spun around and ran, her frail body struggling to move quickly enough. The house was small, and she knew that running toward the back of the house wouldn't save her. Her only thought was escape, but the bear was much faster. Within moments, it was on her, slamming her to the floor with terrifying strength. The pain came quickly. Adelia was thrown into a helpless struggle as the bear's claws raked through her skin, its teeth sinking into her. She was completely at the mercy of the wild creature that had invaded her home. Fear coursed through her, but her faith remained strong. She whispered to herself, believing that God would watch over her, whatever the outcome. It wasn't long before Adelia's strength began to fade. The bear, in its primal hunger, continued its brutal attack. The damage was severe. Within minutes, the woman who had lived so many years with such vitality was left lifeless in her kitchen. Hours later, Adelia's grandson, Richard Ortega, went to check on her as he often did. Their homes were next to each other, separated only by a short distance. Richard liked to visit his grandmother to make sure she had what she needed, from food to simply companionship. But that afternoon, something felt off. When he arrived at the house, he immediately noticed the disarray. The back door, now wide open, sent a chill down his spine. As he entered the house, his calls for his grandmother went unanswered. He moved quickly through the rooms, a sense of dread growing with every step. When he reached the kitchen, the sight that greeted him left him breathless, his world suddenly falling apart. There on the floor was his grandmother. The large, bruised and bloodied form of Adelia lay in the place where she had spent most of her days, her body disfigured beyond recognition. Richard's heart shattered as he knelt beside her, his tears flowing freely. He immediately called the police, and they arrived shortly after. An investigation was quickly launched, with the bear's location becoming the priority. Adelia's family, while devastated, was determined that the animal be found. The authorities had reason to believe that the bear had been wandering in the area in search of food, likely driven by the unusual scarcity of natural sources. The summer had been harsh, with dry conditions followed by late frosts that had decimated crops. The once plentiful fruit trees in the area were bare, leaving the bear to wander in search of scraps. It didn't take long for the authorities to locate the animal. Just half a mile from Adelia's house, the bear was cornered, its days of wandering and hunger coming to a swift end. It was a 4-year-old male weighing around 250 pounds, just the right size to have overpowered a frail elderly woman. Officials speculated that the bear had lost its fear of humans due to the food scarcity that year. With few natural food sources in the area, it had likely wandered closer to home, searching for anything it could scavenge. The news of Adelia's death spread quickly throughout Mora, with many in the community shocked at the rarity of such an attack. It had been more than a century since a bear had killed someone in the state. Locals had heard of bear sightings, but most encounters were non-threatening. The tragedy marked an end to the peace that had defined Adelia's life. Adelia Trujillo's death was a reminder of the unpredictable dangers that lie hidden in the wilderness, and the fragile balance between humans and the wild creatures that roam the earth. While the tragedy of her passing would forever haunt her family, there was solace in knowing that her faith had remained unshaken until the very end. In the end, though the loss was great, her legacy remained a testament to the strength of a woman who had lived her life on her own terms, regardless of what came her way. In the wild, it's not about strength, it's about survival. These bear attacks are only the beginning. Click next to see what happened to others.